The High Performance Podcast, Toto Wolff, all came out last week. But for some reason, Twitter seems to have found it today. Today, we're going to talk about the response. And I come with a bit of optimism. It's time to talk Lewis going to Ferrari. Let's go. So here we go. We are going to talk all things Mercedes, all things Lewis. And to join us to make sure me and Ammar don't go off topic, we have the one, the only F1 Diplomat. How the heck are you, Diplo?
How you doing,
Good,
Diplo?
good.
How are things
Good to be back.
down? Yeah, man, it's good to have you back. How are things in Texas?
Very calm. We just had like a totally nonchalant election that just happened, so everything's fine.
And if you guys want to see more Diplo on this channel, you know what you need to do. Like, subscribe, do it now. Right. So we obviously me and Ammar had a little chat about this interview the other day. We had a chance to listen to it. We had a very, very brief skim read of the book. But I think you don't need to have listened to the interview or even read the book to be able to get where people are coming from. But it seems to have made a lot of people either really angry or a lot of people just nod in agreement. So we're going to get into some of the topics. So the first thing I wanted to tackle was Toto himself. Uh, the In the interview, Toto talks a lot about how he heard about the news that Lewis was going to Ferrari. He talks a bit about um, what that means in terms of future-proofing the team. But the big quote, the incendiary quote, comes from the book where he talks about every driver having a shelf life, about Lewis perhaps losing some cognitive sharpness, and the other big incendiary line of he talks about Lewis going to Ferrari being good news because it meant that he could avoid having to have the conversation where he tells the seven-timer that they don't want him anymore. Yeah. Okay, so I think I know where I stand on this, but I kind of want to know what you guys think. Amar, let's start with you.
Well, as I had said before, I don't think any of his comments are anything out of the ordinary. I mean, you look around sports, and as the saying goes, Father Time is undefeated, unless, of course, you're Tom Brady. So there's that one exception. But I mean, even if you look at Lewis as the exception, I think it's fair to assume that retirement is, on the horizon. Like that's he's probably going to do this for 2, 3 more years. I mean, and certainly Lewis has projected that he has other ambitions outside of racing. He is not Fernando Alonso in that regard, and that's all he really wants to do. He has shown, a liking to do other things, which we would call hobbies right now. So I don't think that Toto was being, incendiary in any way, as you said. I mean, those comments are just sort of par for the course. And personally, I love the fact that Toto was as transparent as he could be. I mean, one of the things we always rail against, something that always gets under my skin is we interview people, they get paid tons of money and they never say anything. They always kind of say the all vanilla sort of start stuff of like, you don't want to offend anyone, you don't want to say anything that, kind of riles people. He was being honest. And I can't blame him for doing that.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with some of those things. Diplo, do you think that perhaps the way Toto phrased it, can you understand why people might feel the way they're feeling at the moment?
I think, the tough part for Toto and for Lewis and for the team is how do you manage a personal and a professional relationship at the same time? There's statements that Toto is going to make that is strictly business because that's who he is. And there's other statements he's going to make that are more personal. And I think the real secret is knowing to decipher when he's being one thing or the other. Because public statements are, in the world of business, they're talking as much to the stakeholders as they are to the people that are fans. You know what I mean? And so some things that Toto says on an interview or in a book, they're going to be not directed to the people that are overreacting on Twitter, but they're going to be more related to the stakeholders that are like, where's this team going? Why haven't why haven't we been seeing results? And so it's another way for someone that has a very hard job of managing not only you know, one of the world's best drivers, but also an organization of close to 3,000 people that involves, investment and stakeholders. That's a way for him to use that channel to also communicate to them. And I think a lot of people, we forget to take a step back sometimes and understand that it's not just about one driver, even though the drivers are really the reasons that fans, follow the teams in the sport. Um, there's a whole lot of people, are there going to be layoffs? Is my salary secure? What do I, and that's sort of the things that he needs to also worry about outside of the internal posturing that could be, circulated just to employees. So for me, it's not a surprise. Um, Maybe a little harsh, but when has he never not been harsh? I mean, he's pretty much been, you know, Toto does play politics. I think you have to play politics in F1 as like it's sort of a cost of entry, right? Like everyone has to play a little bit of it, especially if you're on the, in the top half that's fighting for constructor championships and stuff like that. It's definitely more political there. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a surprise.
I think that's probably where I come down on it as well. And I think your point about having to differentiate between personal and business is absolutely true. And you know, having to move on from a staple of your team is something that every team that has ever managed a great driver has had to do at some point. And invariably, some get it right, and some the timing that is, some get it right, and some don't quite get it right. Like you look at the other big name that retired from the sport in my lifetime, and that was Michael Schumacher. Um, and you could argue that Ferrari let him go a season too early because they were future proofing for the same reason. Ammar, I know you're not going to agree. I know that
But in a
Kimi for
way, though,
you
this
came at
is,
the
yeah, I
same.
don't mean to interrupt, but it's also like, Schumacher was probably, you said the most recent outside of Lewis Hamilton, but Lewis has been with the team for longer, and it's
Mhm.
sort of uncharted, unprecedented territory. So there's no
Yeah.
right or wrong way to handle this because it's
I,
never really happened before. Like, and so, the critics are going to be critics, but you have to think about that. Like this has never been a situation that any F1 team or team principal has had to deal with in the past for a partnership this long. You know what I mean?
yeah, and they did give it a nice glide path. Sorry, Ammar, go for it.
No, but in getting upset, I think the couple things that the people who are getting upset are failing to recognize is this move is instigated by Lewis. Now you can come back and say, look, well, big Mercedes gave him a 1+1, so was the door already closing on him, yada yada yada. Maybe there's some sort of passive aggressive behavior there, but the reality is that Lewis announced the movie. Well, I mean, he didn't even tell Toto about it for a couple of weeks, right? So there's a little bit of a human element of like coping with it. And
Ah,
again,
yeah.
these are alpha males that are competing for everything at the height of the sport, where every single detail matters. So I can imagine a world in which Toto Wolff might have felt hurt. He might have felt hurt. He might have at least said, "Hey, look, you and I go back a decade. The least you could have done is told me that you're going, right? Unless I had to hear it from Carlos Sainz Sr. I mean, so there's an element of that. Just the second element of this, which is also sort of not being talked about enough, is Toto is excited about the future. I mean, he has projected that as well, right? He is
Mm.
excited about who he has in Kimi Antonelli. And we saw what happened at Monza in FP1. Like, I mean, this is going to be an interesting future, at least these next couple of years, where Lewis is on the grid and Kimi's on the grid. And they're, if Mercedes is going to be any good, they're gonna go back and forth. I mean, and between Ferrari, McLaren, and Mercedes, those three teams, and of course Max. But it is going to be interesting, and so Toto has to be excited, and he has to also project that too. So I mean, we
Which I
can
think,
parse
yeah,
out
which I
the framing
think,
of it, but yeah,
yeah, which I think he has. But so what you said there about, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. There has to be some looking to the future, and the fact that they've got two homegrown talents in the car next season is definitely a positive for Mercedes. What I picked up on though, and the thing that made me a bit annoyed, but although I can understand it now, is what you said about Lewis blindsiding Toto a little bit and making him feel a bit annoyed about the whole situation. And that in the book, the quote about the cognitive sharpness came um, pretty soon after the announcement was made. So he was talking to Martin Wyman when that event had happened. So it was still fresh in their mind. So I can understand where that I think is where the business and the personal mix together, right? There's that whole side of, okay, well, Lewis has taken a business decision. He's made life difficult for me. He's put me in a difficult position. He's still my mate, and I love him to bits, but I'm angry at him. And that I think melded together into that cognitive sharpness thing. And that I don't like that statement because it makes me
Why?
think that, well, because
Why?
for me, that's saying he's he's becoming.
But that's his opinion. I mean, I've told you this before, Shez, and none of
Yeah,
us have been as close to Lewis Hamilton, seeing him day in and out as much as arguably Toto is. And there's probably an
yeah,
inner
I don't
circle
disagree
of
with that.
Lewis that knows this. But so maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, but I feel like he's at least earned enough to be able to say what he feels. I mean, he might well be wrong. Lewis might go on a tear and win 2 more championships or even more. Who knows? But
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you're the guy, you're the team principal seeing this, you
yeah.
can't.
And again, I guess I don't know if he's talking about right now or if he's talking about, well, I'm future proofing against any
I mean,
loss
you
of
always want to
cognitive
get
sharpness
ahead
as
of
we go
this,
forward.
though.
And I don't know. Sorry, go on, Diplo. You were going to say
But
something.
I think, yeah, I think that ultimately you sort of laid the groundwork for it when maybe he did feel blindsided by the fact that he wasn't approached on a personal level from Lewis about Lewis's business decision, and that he had to find out through the media or through the dad of the guy Lewis is replacing, allegedly, right? So then it's, and then maybe he's like, okay, well, fine, then I am gonna get the young guy that's in our driver program that has potential, because we've seen that, and maybe he made a statement, maybe it was a little bit of a knee-jerk self-defense mechanism, but it's also, I mean, biologically, right? Like, not an inaccurate statement that most athletes, as they get older, tend to have a decline. And so maybe he's using that as a way to have his get his clap back, so to speak. And I mean,
Jazz does
whether
not
it works
agree
or
with you.
not.
He
No,
does not
no,
agree
no,
with the
I'm not saying I
cognitive
don't
No,
agree with
but
it,
mechanism.
I'm not
but
completely
okay.
inaccurate.
I think that's a pretty good segue to move on to our next little piece. So I think that for me, the crux of why people are getting angry on Twitter, but for me, the reason I think that everyone's getting angry is because there is a certain insecurity within the fan base, even within me. I think that perhaps it's true that Lewis actually is declining, and there's a reason, like a tangible reason, some truth to why Toto and Mercedes made that decision, that actually this is the right time, and perhaps the results. I don't think the timing of Lewis's Brazilian Grand Prix performance, and then this book and this interview coming out has played to any kind of argument that says that he's not declining. Although I'm going to try and make that argument for you in a minute anyway. But I do want to take your guys' thoughts about it first. Like, is this just
From a
have
marketing standpoint, it was perfect timing for the book
yeah?
and for that podcast. But yeah,
Well, depends which side of it you sit on. I think
I mean, look, they got me. I got my thing on pre-order. It's coming in on Tuesday.
You can again, we can talk about the Lewis decline or not. Let's just talk about the decision for a second, right? Lewis made the decision to go to Ferrari after signing a Mercedes, well, 1+1 2-year contract, whatever you want to call it. Um, Logically, you could make the argument that he should have stayed with Mercedes if he really wanted to win that eighth championship, right? Because
really.
if any
Why do
team
you say
would be
that?
in better, hang on, if anything would be better positioned to make him win, I mean, he already has a lot going on with the team, right? Look, frustrations happen, there are ups and downs, but he was with the team. There's a reasonable argument to be made for continuity. Remember, Lewis's decision to go to Ferrari has a lot to do with sort of his personal desire, the romanticism of being with Ferrari, which every F1 driver wants to be with. I don't blame him for it, but if you wanted to be cynical, you could say that his decision to go to
Mm,
Ferrari was probably with the idea that he wanted to end his career with a team that he always loved and once wanted to be with. I think you could make that argument. And certainly when the decision was made, it didn't look like Ferrari would be in the mix. And, look, as a Ferrari fan who has been here and has been hurt, we do this thing. We give two great races and then we follow it up with a dud. And then there are three duds along the way. And then there's two good races, yada yada yada. So I cannot even sit up here and say next year Ferrari are going to be in it. So certainly when Lewis was making that decision, what was it, 6, 8 months ago, whatever it now feels like years ago. Ferrari were not there. I mean, in fact, Fred had said we're going to have to take steps back. They've made progress, right? They certainly have, but there's competition. There's McLaren there, whatever you might think of Lando. Max is not going away, and Red Bull are going to figure out a way to keep him relevant. He only is one driver they have to focus on. That's the good news for them, right? So it's not like going to Ferrari was like going to Red Bull, for example. It wasn't that.
Can
The Red
I
Bull
chime
would have been
in?
harder, I think. Sorry, go on, Diplo. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're good. I was just gonna actually piggyback off of what you said, Ammar, and I think I agree in a lot of ways. I think this was maybe Lewis saying, okay, well, I've had 2 seasons in this ground effect era. Maybe I don't like this ground effect era. Maybe the team's not gonna improve quick enough. And this is like the timing is just right for this last move to happen. If it's gonna happen, it has to happen now. F1 is so much about timing and circumstance. You get in at the right time with the right car, with the right team, and you extract what you can out of it. I think he's okay if he doesn't win any other championship because, like Ammar said, I think this is more of a passion project for him to say that he did it and to try to see if he can raise that bar. If in the time that he's there, the car is good enough and the team is good enough to challenge, I think we will see him challenge and we will see him fight and maybe potentially win. But I think he's also like, okay, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, but I'm doing what I am making my own decision. I am the guy that's going to drive for 3 legendary teams and, accomplish legendary things at each one, even if he doesn't win championships at each one. And that's, I think, maybe the mentality. And we don't know him, but from judging of how
Yeah.
Lewis moves, right? Like what he says and what he doesn't say, sometimes that tells you more about what he wants to do. Yeah, I think it's definitely more likely that I agree with the Mars theory here is that like, hey, it's now or never. If I get that +1 extension, then it's 2026, new car. Now I have a year to catch up with versus him ingraining himself on a write-off year of 2025. Now he's already familiar with the team, already familiar with how they run things, right? It takes a year to get up to speed, see the development for the car, and then attack 2026 like it's a new opportunity. And we'll see what happens.
All of this sounds like somebody that still wants to win an eighth championship. That,
I
to me,
I don't
I
think he
still feel
doesn't
like,
want to win. I think
no,
if
but
there's
I feel like that's his aim. I don't think he's lost that. And I take your points, both of you, about the fact that this might be his last opportunity to go to Ferrari. But I think two things have happened here. One, Mercedes have given him essentially a 1 year deal. The +1 doesn't mean anything because they were banking on Kimi Antonelli coming into the team at some point. So Lewis sees the writing on the wall. What's the point in me staying? I'll get ahead of the curve. And the second is it's not like Mercedes have had anything to write at home about in the last 3 seasons anyway, this season included. Like, yes, he's taken a couple of wins, but where have they been in terms of winning a championship? And I would argue that actually towards the tail end of 2023, actually Ferrari were probably the strongest team. I mean, they were on the cusp of taking the constructors' the second position away from Mercedes in the last race. And ironically, it was Lewis that was putting them in that position with a slightly underwhelming performance, unfortunately. But I think that for me, I still see this as a competitive move. It's not purely because he just wants to romantically drive for Ferrari. But you could, yes, I agree that you could argue it both ways. I do want to tackle the decline question very briefly here because I think a lot of the narrative has been colored by how he drove specifically in Brazil, but also how he's been performing in the past sort of 5 or 6 races after the summer break. But what I would argue is that actually the number one, the pace difference between him and George actually hasn't been that massive. In the first season that they were together, he was the faster of the two. He was marginally faster last season. This season, he's appreciably slower, but things have changed this season as well because up until the summer break, he won 2 races. And it's only since the summer break that he seems to have taken a massive dip in terms of his qualifying performance against George. He was always behind him, but it was by hundredths of a second. Now it's tenths of a second that seems to be happening. So again, I have to argue back against this. He is declining. He is old. For me, this seems much more like a motivational issue, something that he has said himself in Brazil. Why would I bother when it's this bad? I just want to keep the car out the wall. Why can we not just take him at his word when he says that? Because the evidence seems to back that up as well. When he's motivated, he wins in Silverstone, he wins in Spa. When he's not motivated, he just it's not there anymore. But it's not like decline doesn't happen like a light switch from one race to the other, at least not in my experience. And I feel like that's the thing that we're missing here. That what we haven't seen is Lewis back up to his motivation, like fully motivated best, like he was in Silverstone and like he was just before the summer break. And perhaps that's what we're going to see at Ferrari again. And perhaps even I have been a little bit too pessimistic about it. But again,
I think the comments relating to Brazil are a little bit of recency bias. I mean,
I
I
yeah,
think
100%
obviously,
agree with that.
you know, you log into Twitter, F1 is always like the results of the last race, but you have to look at the whole, right? I think we had a conversation about this offline, Shez, about the
Hmm.
pace difference, and we found the data, especially in qualifying, they're pretty much, you know, neck and neck across their time as teammates together, Lewis and George, I mean. But I think, you know, Mercedes, I think hit a really steep plateau with their development, which is odd because usually Mercedes is one of those teams that are like really good at in-season development or mid-season development. Whether the car is good or not, it usually gets better toward the end, right? And now it's sort of the opposite. So, you know, you can see, I mean, both of the drivers are struggling with the car. I personally think they're both extracting more than that car would be able to give to a non-great or good driver. You know, I think they're both trying to force it. We've seen that with their recent crashes and everything too. I think
Hmm.
the car's unstable, but I also think that they're trying to push that limit and knock on some doors, and physics is knocking back. But you know, there's no, I don't think Toto meant like, oh, you know, look at Sao Paulo. It's obvious that Lewis
No,
is
he
declining. I
can't
think
have
he
been.
meant
No,
more
no.
like, hey, if Lewis didn't want to renew, or it didn't want the contract that he had and he went to another team, it
Yeah.
allows me to future proof for the eventual possibility. And I think that that's more where Toto was landing. It's like, hey, at some point we do have to have talks about how much longer do you want to be in the sport? How much, you know, what are you willing to, you know, I mean, and maybe I might make a hot take here. Maybe the fact that Lewis has so much going on outside of being just a race car driver, maybe that actually adds more to the doubt of how long he'd want to continue versus someone like Alonso, which I'm not comparing in any other
No,
way
you
other
can.
than if that's all he knows, then you know, okay, well, who do I trust at 42? It's not about how many championships or wins they have, it's what are they looking for as the next stepping stone in life.
I mean, I fundamentally don't really agree with that, just only because I know that Fernando has also been sitting there saying, like, I'm not particularly gunning for race performances anymore. Everything I'm doing now is to develop the car for next year, which is something that Lewis doesn't have. There's no point in him trying to develop this car for next year. He's not even going to be here. He's done all
Yeah.
that work already. So why bother now? And I get that. I do
My
want to say,
argument was more conceptual, though. It's not just that this season into next season. It's just as a career trajectory, right?
yeah, but I
Like
think
F1 or Fernando, all he knows is motorsport,
yeah, but I think Fernando gets a
right?
free pass a lot of the time, despite the fact that his performances this season, like in the second half of the season, he's been out qualified by Lance can't be bothered Stroll like more often than he should be, like far more often than he should be. Like this is a guy that just
Oh,
decided
come
to
on.
beach it on the gravel to get himself out of a wet race. So
Hey, Shez, one thing
sorry,
before you
that is
move
Stroll.
on, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
the the idea of you saying that the cognitive decline, I think this is a very relative term. We all need to recognize that. No one is saying Lewis has gone from being Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen level to all of a sudden being, well, to use your analogy, Lance Stroll level, right? No one is saying that, right? But there are degrees to it. And so, how old is Lewis? Is he 42? Is he 41? What is he?
39.
39. Okay. 39, almost 40, right? Him juxtapose this to the young crop of Formula One drivers that are coming on the scene and showing incredible capability like one we've never seen before. I mean, even Ollie Behrman jumps into Carlos Sainz's car and scores a P6 in Saudi or P7, whatever it was.
Yeah.
That is the kind of stuff that people like Toto Wolff, that are smart leaders, make decisions and think about
Oh yeah.
succession planning in that
Don't
regard. So, I
don't
mean,
disagree.
the idea of just saying cognitive decline, that it's a relative term, right? It's also coping with a car that clearly Lewis himself has said he cannot cope with. He cannot qualify better on Saturdays, in part because of his driving style that doesn't suit this generation of cars. And as Diplo earlier said, these generational cars are not going anywhere. There's going to be some subtle changes here and there, but they're not essentially going away. They're not going back to the 2021 spec, if you will.
No, I
They're
agree
not
with
going to
that.
go back. So there's going to be decline there. And so I think, again, and let's take the Ferrari side for a second, right? This was going to be a win-win for Ferrari because Lewis represents an upgrade over Carlos, as much as I love him, right? And then the marketing sponsorship deals are great, right? They're just going to be excellent for Ferrari. And so this is a sort of a movie made in real life, right? And this is either going to end spectacularly well, or it's going to burst in flames
Yeah.
because
Okay. Look, I'm going to segue on to the main reason my mate Diplo is on this show. Look, I have to say, right, that my my beef with a lot of the discourse around Lewis is that, oh well, he's getting beaten by George Russell. Like George Russell is nothing. He's rubbish. Like he can't be any good if he's being beaten by George Russell. And I have constantly come on this show and said, look, George Russell for me is one of the top three qualifiers, at least, if nothing else, one of the top three fastest in Formula One right now. Right? Max, Charles, George. And I'm not even going to put them in any order because I don't know which one of those three is quickest. Right? But I can say this, so I'm blue in the face. Ammar, I think it's still TBD. I don't think there's enough evidence here to say that he's that quick. But Diplo, if I can't get through to Ammar and I can't get through to our listeners, help me out, man.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much I can help out because sometimes I resign myself to the fact that like I think I lose more when I try to convince people, especially people I don't know on the internet. But the reality is like, you know, it boggles the mind to me that like I respect Charles as a driver and his potential and his ability. And then everyone is hyping up before Oscar, sat in an F1 car. Like, and then you have this guy who, and again, I mentioned this earlier, not about George, but F1 is so much about timing and circumstance, where you have a driver in George Russell who effectively had the same trajectory from the junior formulas into F1, right? Rookie champion back to back, who at least should be considered in the same vein and respect, right? And then you see that, okay, well, a lot of people write him off just because it's like a self-defense mechanism because he's actually good enough to hold a candle to Lewis pace-wise, at least. And this is the big thing. This is what I got a lot of heat for in the tweet that eventually spurred the data that we talked about, Shez. People are like, come back when you have 7 championships and 105 wins. I'm like, it's not. I'm like, it's not. I'm like, nobody's taking
Yeah.
that away from Lewis, but you'd have to be crazy to say that, like, when you watch them since they became teammates in 2022, they've been the closest delta of pace teammates on the grid. And they're both in that same team, in that same car. Some would argue that they're not, whatever, but that's besides the point. The reality is, right? The reality is that on paper, when the stopwatch stop, they are the closest match pairing. So when George says something like, "Yeah, I pretty much feel like I'm at his level," I don't think he thinks that he's trying to lie to himself and say he's a 7-time world champion with 105 wins. I think he's saying, "Well, the first benchmark I have is my teammate. My teammate is one of the best drivers in the sport, if not the best. So if I can match him across a season, across 2 seasons, across 3 seasons, then maybe I am at his level in this time and place as far as pace goes." Now, I think George, for as fast as he is on a Saturday, has still a lot of work to do on Sundays. Um, a little bit more consistency, a little bit better of tire and pace management, but he'll get the opportunity to do that if Mercedes give him a car that's consistently able to stay at the front, right? And then he has to learn how to manage the pace from the front and learn how to, basically be more consistent. But, a lot of like every car that George drives at the same token is the fastest car he's ever known in F1, right? Versus Lewis is coming at it from I've raced multiple eras of formula. I've raced across different regulations and different teams. And he's been able to say, okay, well, yeah, obviously I'm not coming to terms with this car. I don't like the concept,
Diplo,
whatever it might be.
just to interrupt you for a second, right? Do you
Go
not
ahead.
think that like Charles and Lando are all in the same position though? That like all the drivers, and I think you've said it before as well, that
Okay.
the drivers that haven't won a world championship are all roughly in the same boat. The car that they are currently driving is the fastest they have ever known. Like Lando's never had a quicker car than the
Yeah,
MCL36,
I don't
right?
disagree. The only asterisk that I'll put next to George's name is that he's only been in the car since with that team since ground effect, whereas
Mm.
Charles and pretty much Lando has been at McLaren his entire F1 career. Charles has been there all but his first year at Sauber, but he was pretty much getting groomed for Ferrari. So they've had more time in a environment that can build and develop them a little bit better because you have that, even if the car's not good, you have the top engineers. I mean, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull, they're going to get better talent than the other teams. And it's not to say that there's, less or lack of talent, but everyone wants to work for the teams that are winning or fighting for wins and so on and so forth, right? So in some ways, George was stuck in the Williams. I think he showed us some magical moments of ability and talent
Yes, he
in that
did.
Williams, right? He hasn't had great teammates to benchmark against, but then he comes in. First off, we talk about Sakir like it's a dead horse at this point, but he was on track to win the race before the puncture, right? And that's pace, right? I mean, like, and that was one of the best cars that he's ever had the chance to drive, but it was only a stand-in performance, so we didn't know sample size was low. The way that we see respect as fans is like, oh, hi, Lewis. I'd love to learn a lot from you, and I'll do whatever you say. Wow, so much respect. You show respect to your teammate and the person you're competing with by giving them 100% of what you've got, and you're forcing them to do better, and vice versa. And when Lewis exceeds in one weekend and George feels like crap because he bottles it like in Singapore, yeah, it's gonna hurt, but it's also supposed to make George do better next time.
Yeah, I do agree that like rather than looking at this as um Lewis is being done dirty. It's much the way I see it certainly is that it's much more about Lewis having to prove himself against, as Ammar has said, one of these up and coming drivers who has a lot to prove. You might say Lewis has nothing to prove, but actually the whole point of like this ongoing debate about whether he's declining or whether he's still got it is that he has to show up against the new generation. And I think George is at the forefront of that. But Amara, the big question is, are you convinced, or is it still TBD?
Well, as I've always said, and I appreciate everything that Diplo said, right? I think it's 100% true, and I don't disagree with any of it. But I think the reality is George Russell has not been given the card that he deserves. So it's really difficult to sit up here and sort of say, sort of what if and where he falls in the category of those that sort of current generation of drivers, right? If you want to put Lewis and Alonso on one side because they're 39, 42, right? That range. Russell is definitely in there. There's no arguing that whatsoever, right? I mean, on the other hand, I would also say that you get the results you get. And so Charles has results. Lando's got results. Whatever you might think of it, there are results. You can't hold it against them either, right? My greatest thing with all of this is don't care about my opinion. Just look at what Toto Wolff did in the aftermath of the Lewis Hamilton news. There was a public flirtation with Max Verstappen that lasted all but up 6 months. I think up until the point that Max said, "Get off my lawn." Like that's essentially what he did, right? He's like, and even now the door is open. I just wonder, I don't know. But again, I have said earlier on today that, Toto's seeing a lot of data, a lot of analysis. He's closer to these guys. He loves them probably more than I do, right? He's also succession planning for George Russell in a way. And if I'm George Russell, I'm playing my cards well to go join McLaren next year because I definitely think that if Max is coming, he's going to be the odd one out. And I'm not suggesting that he's weaker or anything like that, but that just seems to be the writing on the wall. That was my only thing.
Final word on this. I think George has enough credit in the bank from his junior career and how he stacked up against arguably the greatest driver of all time, that if he is left without a seat at Mercedes, he will probably still land on his feet
Oh
somewhere
yeah.
with a good opportunity. On that note, I think it's probably time to call it. Diplo, thank you so much for being on, man. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure. Your insights are invaluable. Ammar, mate, thanks for you too. It was great.
Oh, wow.
Ammar's like, I have
Glad
no
I could
choice,
do
I guess. But
it.
thanks for having me. It was an awesome discussion, though, for sure.
Yeah.
Always
Let's
is,
do this
man.
again.
Always is.
Let's
And we will definitely do it again. And if you liked having Diplo on, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one and we'll reply to as many as we possibly can. And we will see you guys in the next one. Thank you very much.